Score, the podcast. The only show taking you inside the studios of the world's most celebrated composers and musical storytellers. Presented by Vienna Symphonic Library. Here are your hosts, Kenny Holmes and Matt Schrader.
What's up, guys? I'm Kenny Holmes.
I'm Matt Schrader.
And he's right here. I can see him and touch him.
We're in person. How weird, where there's no boxes.
It's crazy. It's crazy. This isn't an illusion. We're sitting here inside Holmes Productions, and we're so excited to be back. Score the Podcast, Season 6. You know, when we started this show in 2018, the idea was to bring you inside composer studios. Obviously, 2020 caused a lot of hiccups with that. A lot of people started doing remote stuff, but we are back to doing it in person. We're so excited to be doing so.
And look how good it looks.
Yeah, it's great. 4K. Can you believe it? If you're watching us on YouTube or Spotify, thank you. If you're listening on your favorite podcast app, good to be back. Be sure to check out the video versions of the show, though, because we're going to be showing you some stuff. Production value elevated.
Yep. Some extra social clips that we'll be releasing. So you'll want to be sure to be following us on all social platforms. But we have some really cool stuff in the works.
Yeah, I think if you liked Score, a film music documentary, which I know a lot of you found us through that, think like little kind of featurettes like that inside Composer Studios. We're going to be filming that stuff that you can't really do in an interview. But we'll be filming it and posting it after. So YouTube, you can find us at Score the Podcast, and then you probably know all of the social accounts, but at Score Movie or at Score the Podcast on most of the social accounts. We're so excited for our season premiere guest. He was a guest on the show back in 2019. At that time, he was building a new studio that we talked about, the Scoring Lab, on the show. We're going to be going inside in just a bit. Benjamin Wallfisch, he had a huge summer. Alien Romulus, Twisters. He's got Kraven the Hunter coming up. He's just on fire right now, and I'm sure it was a real
even
thrill
Twisters. This summer's just such a great return. I mean, the cool thing is we're releasing at a time where there's all these great films that are starting to come out. I think we could admit there's been a couple lulls over the last couple years. There's been some periods of not as great of films coming out and TV shows, but we're really getting into some good stuff again. And it started with this summer with Twisters being such a big thing, and and Benjamin being a huge part of the musical approach to that is just like that's the cinema that we love, you know, on the big screen. And then Alien Romulus, which I think people expected to be a hit, but maybe not to the level that it was.
Yeah. It's great.
So great film. But yeah, quite a summer for him.
Yeah, and I think it feels like movies are being made that are encouraging you to go back into the theater, which is fun. I mean, it's great to be able to watch stuff on streamers, and there's that in its own way is fantastic when you don't have to deal with people bothering you. But there are a lot of movies that have been coming out and that are coming out that are made to see in a theater with the Atmos sound, which, by the way, Benjamin Wallfisch's studio, the Scoring Lab, is an Atmos mixing
It's really cool
place. So you're going to be seeing some of that stuff in our bonus features and all that stuff as well. So we'll getting to Ben in just a bit, but we want to introduce our new sponsor as well. We're really excited to have Vienna Symphonic Library joining us on this season.
Used by so many of our guests, including Benjamin Wallfisch.
Yeah, he recorded Kraven the Hunter on the Synchron stage in Vienna. So you're going to be hearing a lot about these sample libraries, the stage itself, the great team over there. I mean, it's the city of music, Vienna.
That's right.
It's literally made of notes. If you haven't been there.
And Vienna Symphonic Library is interesting because they have their own stage, the Synchron stage there, where real shows, real movies are being scored all the time, but they've also taken the same approach to their sample libraries that they make available to every composer at their own workstation, at their own keyboard of whatever sort you have, and this is really cool stuff. We've been sampling some of it ourselves, and the Synchron Series is what they have recorded on their big stage A of Vienna Synchron Stage, where they're also recording The Crown, series for Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, Bear McCreary's music for Rings of Power, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, Benjamin Wallfisch has done several things there
Dune
as well.
Prophecy, Volker Bertelmann, the Oscar winner.
So this is it's a place that's really starting to explode. And if you want a lot of that in your pocket, at your keyboard, at your fingertips, this Synchron series is really the industry standard. You get the whole orchestra, all of these amazing instruments, plus piano, choir elements, and they have a Synchron Duality strings package. If you just want to really refine that, this is the coolest thing, because they've recorded simultaneously on their big stage and also a smaller stage that is a drier kind of a sound. So what this tool lets you do is blend between those and really dial in the exact sound that you want with the strings that you're using to create your unique sound. And there is a promo code that we want to tell you.
Yeah,
the promo code. It's unique for this show. And that code is SCORE Vienna. Altogether, gets you 20% off through December 18th. So we got a couple weeks here.
Get yourself a Christmas present. Wrap it up. Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate, buy yourself a gift. It's the holiday season, and 20% off. Thanks to our new sponsor, Vienna Symphonic Library. These guys are great. And go check out their website, too. There's a ton of different packages, and you can use the sample libraries to try stuff out. There's videos to see some of the different sounds and hear them as well. And then stick around at the end of the show today. We're going to play you a cue that they mocked up of James Newton Howard's.
Yep, Fantastic Beasts.
Fantastic Beasts, and that's the title of that film is always so long. I have to think of it.
I shortened it, yeah.
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. They mocked up one of James Newton Howard's scores with their sample packages, and
sounds really good.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it sounds like you recorded your stuff right there at the Synchron stage, which they did. It's real instruments. These are real players recording this stuff. And it's a real way to elevate your sound as an up-and-coming composer or as a working composer. Get these packages, check them out, and save 20%. SCORE Vienna. All right, I think it's time we head over to the scoring lab with our guest this week, Emmy, Grammy, BAFTA-nominated composer, Golden Globe nominated too, Benjamin Wallfisch. Let's do it. When we last chatted with you in, I think it was 2019, what we're sitting in right now was a thought. It was happening, but it wasn't completed. And here we are. This place is terrific. Are we in the scoring lab or the mixing lab? Is there two different things? Can you walk us through it?
So this is the writing room. I had this crazy idea a few years ago, and I think in retrospect, it was maybe very much on the crazy side to build this place. I've always been obsessed with the idea of making a studio since I was a kid. I just remember those early days visiting like CTS Wembley and Abbey Road and just marveling at the architecture and just how cool it all is. And I started chatting with Peter Grünheisen, legendary architect, and it was more just an excuse to kind of experience what it's like working with someone like him. You know, if this place was available as a warehouse, and I don't know, it just was an idea. It was mostly driven by discovering Atmos and the potential of Atmos for scoring. And at that time, 5 or 6 years ago, there were very few places to mix in Atmos. It was mostly the big dub stages. And I just wanted to get my hands dirty and experiment. And, you know, where could I do that? There just weren't many options. So I just thought, well, maybe this is something I could try. And speaking to Peter and a few other friends, the idea for this place was born, where we just would have a fully Dolby certified Atmos room, basically as a kind of hybrid dub stage and music scoring mix stage. And that would give me an excuse to build a writing room like this, which, again, looking back, because this was just before COVID, and we finished the build February 2020. So there was a small intervention.
Could there be worse timing almost?
Yeah. I mean, we're building a hermetically sealed with air circulate. It was just a total disaster. So because the business model was that we would rent out the mixed room as a dub stage. And we did do that, but only after about 18 months after it was finished. So it was a really tough thing to pick up after that. But we did do it, and we had some really cool people come by and use the place. Joni Mitchell was in there. We had Billie Eilish. We mixed the new Disney 100 logo was mixed in there.
Nice. Wow.
Chris Beck's brilliant rearrangement of the Disney cue. And there was a bunch of other people who came. My good friend Vicky Giordano managed the place for a while, and she kind of corralled and found all these wonderful people to come by. And yeah, so since then we've just been kind of using it mostly as a scoring mix room, and it was just, yeah, I mean, looking back, it was very ambitious, and I don't think I'd do it again now. But I'm glad that we have the space. I feel very fortunate, and it's a really fun place to work.
I know when we spoke with you the first time about this, and this was still very much an idea. I guess you probably had committed and were starting to build all of it out at that point. But we were just talking about what Atmos means, and to some extent, at that point, it was thought of a lot as a sound, you know, it's object-based sounds kind of a thing. But I'm curious how your kind of understanding of that for your music, does it change the way you write anything? Does it change the way you approach anything? Like earlier on, are you starting to think, you know what, this would be really cool if we record this separately because maybe that can live here instead of there, or anything like that you've noticed working its way into your writing process?
I think it's super important to work with amazing engineers who and kind of have an adult in the room there when it comes to those sorts of decisions. Because no, it hasn't really affected how I've written. I just remember the experience working on Blade Runner 2049 with Hans and Ron Bartlett, the re-recording mixer, and we delivered, I think, 5 one masters or even quad, like 20 stems. And then Ron turned that into an Atmos mix, and it was just the most exciting thing I've ever been a part of, just to see what he was doing, the choices he was making. And it's such an interesting, because I wouldn't say we're at ground zero now, but back then there wasn't really an established way to record an orchestra in Atmos. And I think it's kind of becoming more established now. I recently worked with Pete Cobbin, Kirsty Wiley, and they've come up with this extraordinary array just above the Decca tree, which they're calling the Thunder Array. It's 11 microphones replacing the traditional 5 in a Decca tree.
Oh, cool. Wow. Okay.
And it's amazing the effect it has if you pan those microphones. That they're using these DPA 4041s, which are these beautiful large diaphragm Omni microphones, and they're replacing the traditional M50 Neumann M50s, which we use for the left, center, right. And it's just, they have just as much beauty in the sound, but it's somehow a bit clearer. And because each microphone is matched, it's I think that combined with the new Atmos reverbs that we have, for example, Eventide have a beautiful, the Black Hole Immersive, which is now Atmos. We have what else? There's Cinematic Rooms, which is native Atmos. But what it is, it's kind of like that experience that we have as composers, where you stand in front of an orchestra and you hear them play live, is such an extraordinary emotional hit. And I'm always trying to recreate that in the theater. And I think we have the tools now to truly do that. I mean, even hearing it in stereo is incredible. I mean, think of Star Wars. That was stereo. Course. And it hits you as hard as anything. And I think now that we have this technology, it's almost about restraint, because the worst thing you can do is go, cool, here's a joystick, let's send the synthesizer all around 3D. You don't want to distract the audience. And actually, I don't use like multiple objects. We just use 4 objects for the 4 ceiling speakers, and that's all. It's typically a 7.1.4, so 7 on this axis, on the horizontal axis, and then 4 above, and then the
projecting whatever they call it.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I guess it helps just bring the music into a slightly more distinctive space than the sound design, but ultimately it's about giving as much control to the dub stage as possible. So we're still delivering like 19 individual stems, even though they're in Atmos, they can still modify. And it's just a really amazing tool to get creative with, but also not kind of get distracted by. And I think that was one of the reasons I wanted to build a room like that. I've been obsessed with ATC speakers for forever, and I just thought, wouldn't it be fun to have a all ATC Atmos room? And
yeah,
it was nuts. I mean, like I said, I'd never do it again, and bit of a midlife crisis, but we did it, and it's there.
I can't help but wonder too. You talked about different artists coming in. Yeah. There's got to be a networking play there too, because they're coming in to use your space, and you get to spend some time with them and work along with them. Do you think that might play into how you bring someone on board to a project? I
mean, honestly, I really didn't want to go down that road. I just wanted to, give them the space as a private space, and like, oh my God, it's so cool that they're there. But the most I would intervene was say hi. I'm so happy.
Right. Yeah.
So no, it was more just to kind of, it's wonderful to have people's feedback, I guess, on the room. But yeah, I tried to keep a low profile on that front.
I want to ask you, because you've had quite a ride this summer with Twisters and Alien Romulus, both both huge hits, both super cool. The music has been very highly received by a lot of people.
Thank you.
How long ago did you, before those came out, were you wrapping that up? Was that one of those things where you were done with it 6 months before, 3 months before, 1 month before?
Well, I was very lucky that there was they were somewhat sequential, but no, it was very much like, I mean, Alien was one of those movies which I'd known about for quite a while before I started working on it, and it's such an extraordinary sort of terrifying, but also equal part terrifying, equal part exciting project to be involved with, because I've been obsessed with those scores of Goldsmith now, and
amazing.
I mean, Goldsmith in particular, just there's something about the orchestration which he defined, this idea of what can a sci-fi orchestra be, and it's so simple. And then, when you think about the Golden Thor, for the third movie, and just how he ran with that, and in between what James Horner did with all the action and the incredible visceral power of the more percussive elements. It's enough to go, okay, so how can you possibly follow? And of course, you have all these beautiful scores from Harry Gregson Williams and all the others. And it just was this case of following Fede's lead. He's such a fantastic musician, had such a visionary when it comes to music as well as everything else. And
first time working with him.
First time, yeah. Mm-hmm. And he just had this, I mean, we're equally obsessed with film scores in general, and particularly the kind of classic Goldsmith sound, but he really wanted to do something completely fresh as well and find a balance between the electronic sound and that classic orchestration, and also just kind of tell the story of siblinghood, which drives the story so much. Yeah. And there's lots of other things happening underneath the kind of visceral horror and the personal interrelationship there, and so we developed the themes well in advance and really kind of got into that process of suites like way before we started scoring. It spent a good few months, probably 45, 50 minutes of music away from picture, just experimenting.
Now, is that something you always do, or is that something you did a little differently this time?
I always try and do it now.
Okay.
Yeah, it's over time I've done it more and more, but now it just, even if I have only a few weeks to finish a score, just spending like 3 or 4 days kind of free-forming, it's just a really great shorthand when you have that first spotting session, or just to kind of break the ice creatively, so you're not kind of thinking technically about how you're going to structure a scene and the pacing. It's just, what is that raw emotional response to the story or to the way an actor is evoking a character. And it's kind of crazy. If I don't do it, I'm finding myself just kind of riffing more. Whereas like if you just spend a day just like really contemplating and just coming up with it, you might throw it out. I mean, often I write a suite and it doesn't make it into the film, but it's somehow just the act of free-forming in a very open way. It's really helpful.
Yeah, kind of building a vocabulary and a
and
lexicon.
I learned that completely from those years working with Hans. That's a huge part of his process, and it's amazing to see how that works.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they stayed true to the originals. A lot of films nowadays are using green screens, and you're probably scoring to X's all over the screen. But this film was puppetry. You're seeing probably the monsters and and everything that's happening while you're scoring it. How much did that help you get into the vibe of the originals?
Oh my God, it was so helpful, because you're right. A lot of these movies, fantasy films or anything that involves, anything that involves a lot of CG. Yeah, sometimes you have a card that is describing what's going on, or some kind of previs, and you just make the best of it. But oh my God, this is so visceral. The puppeteer, and I think he actually used some of the original puppeteers from Aliens. They were in their 20s back then, and they came back, and just seeing this stuff in the very early edits, before any of the effects, it immediately you're just in an Alien film, and you kind of have that sense of, okay, we've got to deliver now on that tone. But still, I mean, Fede's whole approach, it's a very emotional film, and we're with those characters so much more deeply than you'd expect to be, and all the more reason that we had to. I mean, for example, Andy's theme, that took forever to figure out, because it was like, okay, obviously Rain as the main character needed something, and that was very much connected with her search for the sun and to see the sun, and decided that she represents hope, and so her theme, which rises, starts with there's like a mirror note, which is like a fifth above the second note, or actually, and then dum, bum. Actually, I'll play it here. So there's like the mirror note, and then you have a rising, and then it goes down. So if that was in the middle, and then you just do it backwards. That's literally her theme, and then it just carries on. Just a bit of a larger interval. And for Andy, her brother, okay, so he's a robot, effectively. Right. Wouldn't want to use that word. Artificial human, I think it was. Yep. And he changes halfway through. He gets glitchy. He's dangerous, but also incredibly vulnerable, and is such a lovable and loving character, but also there's something strange about him too. And it's probably 2 or 3 iterations of his theme until I realized, hang on a second, what happens if you just do it backwards, So that's Andy's theme,
nice.
Which is Rain's theme backwards as siblings, which is obviously with the Romulus idea, Remus and Romulus. So little tricks like that would literally happen during playback meetings, 4 weeks before we recorded it, where Fede was like, it's just still not working. And I'm like, okay, what if we just do it backwards? Yeah, that's it. Okay. Yeah. Pull out all these cues, replace the tune. And yeah, so it's what I love about the process when you're working with an artist like Fede or the editor, any of these filmmakers, these artists, there's just a constant dialogue that just trigger a little, you just got to run with solutions very quickly. And before you know it, you have something which somehow just then sits and feels like it's come from inside the film. And you just had to discover it. It's always been there. You just had to kind of uncover it.
Did he know that it was, did you present it as this is the backward theme?
Oh yeah, I was just in the room. So, well, what happens if we just do it backwards?
That's
so,
try
cool.
it.
And
everyone just greenlit right there. They're like, that's it.
Yeah, I like to make decisions quick. And then the other part is that the alien, the xenomorph theme is also, you take out the first note and you just add a note. So sometimes which is a bit more tense. And what was fun about that is the idea was like, actually everyone's connected, because the whole central story of Prometheus Fire, this idea that, there's this superior DNA effectively that, if humans could somehow be a part of this. And, so a big part of the story is an attempt to share the aliens' DNA. So I thought that would be appropriate to give all of the main characters the same DNA.
And you did pay homage to Goldsmith and Horner a little bit in your theme writing.
Right.
Was that something that you felt strongly about? Was that Fede? And did you go back into the archives and discover anything? Were you able to see any of the original Goldsmith transcripts or anything?
It was so important because it's as much of the fabric of the movie as any of the set design or the characters or the story. It's so iconic, and just the simple oh, this is going to sound terrible, but
it's a child's piano.
The thing on the woodwind, let's not use that because that's such a terrible homage but that beautiful thing in the woodwinds, but just that concept, I was just thinking, gosh, Goldsmith only had tape delays back then. Now we have things like Echo Boy and Atmos delays that can, and so I thought, wouldn't it be fun to use thirds instead of triads, just dyads, and make a much more complex kind of beds of woodwind delays, so that it's like you have a polyphonic chord of 6 notes, and that kind of delays around the theater and sort of disappears into space.
Yeah.
It's completely based on Goldsmith's concept, but just, 30, 40 years later, what that could be. Because, of course, he was so into technology as well of his time. Perhaps he would have done that. And the same with Horner, just the simple idea of putting a Bartok pizzicato through a delay. So iconic to aliens. And it was just really important to put as many of those little Easter eggs as we could, as well as explicit quotes. So when we see Rook, of course, for the first time, we hear that da 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 from the Awakening cue, and of course, talking about Prometheus Fire, we wanted to make sure we reprise that from Harry's score, and there are lots of little Easter eggs, just because it's a love letter to this whole world.
Do you remember going to the theater and seeing these films?
I saw Alien on VHS.
Okay.
I smuggled it.
The proper way to see it the first time, yeah.
Without parents' permission.
Oh, totally. I think it was with some friends, and the scariest movie ever made. But weirdly, I had the Horner score on cassette, just randomly as part of my collection as a kid on my Walkman. I don't know why. And I just, it was just something I liked to play when I wanted to feel scared, just because and at the time I just had no idea what was going on. It was a bit like listening to E.T., where I'm just fascinated by the harmonies and by how is this even possible? And, I had no idea back then what Horner was doing technically, but I just knew the emotional impact it had. And
do you think about what young Ben Wallfisch listening to his Walkman would think that in the future you'd be scoring the film that goes in between those two?
Not really. I mean, it's
kind of crazy.
I mean, it's insane. I feel so lucky. I mean, what can I say? I don't think about that too much, other than just how fortunate. And I mean, I'm just amazed to this day. I get opportunities to work on these movies, which are, because it really is a huge responsibility. But it's also like any project, no matter its history, it's that responsibility to the filmmaker's vision and to do something that really feels authentic in terms of it being new and fresh, but also just really paying respect and writing a love letter.
Yeah.
And
well, I don't know if you read some of the stuff, but the fans loved it. I don't know if you ever go through and read comments and that sort of thing, but
everyone
you
says
achieved what the fans were hoping for in that score.
Well, that's lovely to hear. No, that's a big part of it too. Actually, is just making sure that the people who live for this stuff, you try not to write think too much. Oh, people are going to like this. You just got to write what's right for you and what's right for the filmmaker.
Yeah.
But to your point of doing the research, I did a massive deep dive into those three scores: the Goldsmith, Horner, and the Goldenthal, and also scores surrounding them, things they wrote either side. Mostly just to kind of get into the DNA of it. So I didn't want to quote it, but I just wanted to get the feeling of it. Like we know that we're in this place, but we're using a new chords, new melodies, but it's definitely in the alien world. And yeah, hopefully.
I know Ridley. I was on the carpet with you actually at the premiere. It was great to see you and all the little alien handouts they were giving all the toys out. But Ridley came through, and I'm curious. He was a producer on the film, not the director this time. But how involved was he? Was he in the room during all of this stuff, or was he kind of just overseeing?
Well, he wasn't involved directly with the score, but I know that he and Fede had a lot of very close interaction, and
I'm sure
it was amazing hearing Fede talk about the filmmakers he's been talking to about it. Whilst he was working on some incredible anecdotes. Yeah, so I think he was pretty involved.
Now, all of this came after you finished with Twisters, or was that what was the order of these?
I honestly can't remember.
Okay,
it was there was. It's a bit of a blur, but there was. Thankfully, they didn't overlap too much.
Yes,
I think we were mixing one as the other was ramping up. So,
okay.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me about Twisters is obviously, there's all of these concerns about kind of the future of the movie theater, and a lot of really kind of genuine concern about what happens if people stop going to the movies. And Twisters was great because it gave kind of a bigger example of a film that, again, could do very well in theaters and became an experience that even to the extent that, like, I was going to ask you about the whole, there's the movement chairs, the 4DX experience that kind of became its own weird kind of viral thing that people were doing.
Sprayed with water in the face during the film and stuff.
Smells and fog and rocking chairs and all that. But the opening of that film, I thought it was one of those great examples of a film that immediately immerses yourself. And I thought of what Hans has told us in the past, which was that real estate at the start of a film gives you a little extra something to invite the audience in. And I was thinking, I wonder if Ben is doing that, because I think it's from the very first logo, we start to hear the music that then builds us into that opening scene, and you're just on I'm totally in, 10 seconds in, it's like, I'm in wherever
Hands
this is taking me.
Hands are sweating. Yeah, totally. Especially because it's a tornado, which is probably one of the scariest things to me, at least.
Sure.
So tell me about the opening of something like that and establishing an idea right away, because it seems like that was probably a focus here.
It really was, yeah, and I couldn't agree more. Just those opening statements, you're kind of setting out your stall, and it can also be quite ambiguous, and that can be a statement in of itself. But Isaac Chung is such an amazing filmmaker, and his whole approach, this is a huge event film with this massive set piece, very physical, very exciting, incredible thrill ride. But at every moment, he's constantly thinking about how can we make sure this is relatable, and how do we involve the idea of the personal. We're thinking about the characters, we're thinking about their relationship and the whole. I mean, Kate's history, for example, the tragedy she goes through, which is what we see in that first opening scene, how that affects her, how Tyler coming into her life, how does that what does that bring out in her, and their shared passion from different angles, and also just this incredible team spirit, and it's an amazing movie when it comes to just examining friendship, and this is musically where we kept coming from, because I love Mark Wincina's score so much, and it's so iconic, and it's just big and brash and exciting and bombastic. I mean, there's lots of other layers to it, of course, and some of my first iterations were kind of in that vibe, but Isaac just really wanted to feel more personal, and so a lot of the first experiments were thinking about the wonder of the nature, this idea of nature's masterpiece and the mystery of tornadoes. To this day, people don't fully understand how they're formed. We have an idea of all the aspects that need to come together in perfect harmony to actually generate this majestic and crazy, dangerous thing. But there's this idea of the wonderment of it and the beauty of it. So the very first idea was just this kind of interlocking piano piece, which for me kind of was the sound of rain, I guess.
Yeah.
And started running with that, and we placed it in the nature's masterpiece thing where both characters were explaining how tornadoes formed independently of each other.
It's really a beautiful combo with the cinematography and everything. The opening is so great, yeah.
And so thanks, man. And we just quoted that at the beginning, and then we were just straight into the set piece. But yeah, it was just important to sort of establish that this isn't going to be just about the scale. It's about the people, and it was definitely more challenging because, whenever I presented a cue that was just big, bombastic, right, it just didn't quite fit. We had to kind of make it more personal, which, it doesn't really sound like a follow-up to the Mancina score. It's a different approach. Yeah. But that's because of Isaac's it's because of Isaac's new way of approaching the movie.
Well, and he grew up in Arkansas in tornado land.
Exactly.
Right?
Tornado Alley? Almost. I guess not quite.
Have you ever experienced a tornado? Did you guys talk about that at all?
Oh, yeah. No, he definitely has. I haven't. We had big storms in London. There was a couple of big ones in the 80s, which I remember very well. But nothing like Tornado Alley, sure.
I saw, I think it was a Q&A or something that he did. Spielberg was an executive producer on the film, and it seemed that he paid a little homage to Jaws and treating the tornado a bit like Jaws,
right? Even
pulling yellow barrels behind the truck to kind of nod to that.
Totally.
Did you have any discussions about treating the tornado like the shark and how to approach the score to make it almost scarier than it is?
Right. Yeah, I mean, everyone knows it's one of the greatest moments of genius in scoring is the Jaws theme, because a lot of the time the shark isn't on the screen, and just hearing that motif just creates such danger in just a massive wide shot of the water. And yeah, we did experiment with that. But also it was quite hard to pace that, because we wanted the audience to have a break. But I think there are 9 storm sequences, and I can't remember the exact number, but there's a fair number. And we were keen that, between the storms, that we just, we're pacing things so that it's not tense all the time. But definitely there's some motifs that I think it was more about the tone of the score. To start with, the storms are actually just really fun. They're kind of team building, and we're just fully involved in this, this culture of storm chasing and just how dangerous it is, but also just how fun and cool it is. And especially with Tyler's crew, and they're like a family. And Kate and Harvey's much more scientific, and they've been through a true tragedy, and Tyler hasn't yet. And so we're seeing this contrast between the two and wanting to capture that musically, and it's fun. But then it's just things start to turn, and the score kind of goes from being much more of the place, using folk influences, to being much more heavy and using more electronics, and things just feel much more serious. So there was a sort of evolution where each storm has its own character, I guess.
Yeah.
I know it's been a while probably since this initial challenge of scoring a tornado, which seems like an almost impossible idea of how is music going to fit around just insanity of the sound design that this film is going to have. But what was your kind of approach to get in and out of some of those big action things, so that, I mean, knowing that at the end of the day, there's going to be an insane amount of sound that is going to be going into the final product here.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's just about, I guess, staying clear of the low end, but also just trusting. You have to hand this stuff over to the re-recording mixers and just know that they're going to do what needs to be done. I think a lot of it was actually just focusing less on the sonic, but just making sure the music itself represented the idea. Because I love the idea of just a twisting formation of air, and then and there are conflicting formations of air, and this kind of idea of two spirals going against each other. And there are some elements in the score where you hear that, where melodies are heard simultaneously backwards and inverted, whilst the main thing is playing. We did that with the piano stuff, for example. And they're subtle, but they represent what's going on inside the tonic. So we just wanted to put all those little things under the surface, so that even when it's just being lambasted by sound design, what's in there kind of makes sense.
There's some order and chaos, and where they cross over, maybe you don't know, but
When you start to write for that movie, it's an interesting one, because we're kind of going through this cyclical thing where everything that was cool in the 90s is coming back. And I feel that way about films now, where soundtrack scores, or song scores, I should say, are kind of coming back on bigger films. There's a lot more pop artists writing songs. I mean, this film has 2 different vinyl records out. One is your score, and one is, or not vinyl, I should say CD or whatever it is now. But artists, there's a whole country album. When you're going into that film, were you competing with song placements and needle drops? Were they finding places? I mean, how does that all come together? Because that's a big moneymaker for the studio. Obviously, they want to get big name Jelly Roll and all these guys on the film. But how does that come into play when you're starting to score? Are those songs already in place, or does that happen as you're scoring?
It was very carefully planned out beforehand. All the song placements were very much in place when we spotted the movie. I think there was one sequence where there was a song where there was some experimentation with actually using score instead, but that was only one towards the end of the film. It was kind of like, I knew from the beginning the role of these songs, and they're amazing songs, all bespoke for the movie.
It's a great tracks.
And just kind of, finding good segues into them, so it just feels kind of really fluid and like an elegant handoff to the songs and away and back to the score, those kinds of things. And also just letting the songs really do the heavy lifting when it came to establishing the sense of place. We subtly allude to that a little bit with some of the instrumentation in the first 30-40% of the score, but it wasn't like I had to really kind of make it all about the folk music of America in the score. There's little it's happening anyway in these incredible songs.
Do you feel like that's happening, that there's more songs in films? It seems like it. I mean, I don't remember there in the 90s especially. I mean, every film had a second soundtrack that was U2 and all of these, and then it feels like in the 2000s and 2010s era, I don't remember that happening much, but people are buying physical media more. I mean, do you see that a lot from your side of things?
I hope so. I mean, it's such a cool thing that you'd have. I don't know, The Power of Love or something, Back to the Future would be a hit number one and bolster the movie, and vice versa. And there's so many examples of that, you know, Kiss of a Rose, you know, Seal with Batman. There's so many things you can think of. But I love the way there's this definite resurgence of, you know, love of vinyl in particular. And it gives us another outing creatively to just kind of take this raw material and reinvent it. With Alien, actually, we're about to release a second vinyl, which I can probably announce it here. Why not? It's an unreleased 14-minute suite, which we recorded with orchestra that was intended for the end credits, but we actually found ourselves doing something else for the end credits. So we're putting that on a vinyl just as a dedicated
cool.
release. And there's some tracks on side B of stuff that wasn't on the original album. And we might also be releasing a kind of sketchbook of some of the
nice.
Demos and the suites, which didn't make it into the score.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just amazing that people seem to dig that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
It's really fun to put it out there.
One other question I had about Twisters is this is always the sign that a movie has succeeded is people on social media start talking about the kind of most smallest thing possible with the movie. The two characters don't kiss at the end.
That was
and
a
the
deal.
internet said, why didn't they kiss at the end?
Especially with Glenn Powell movies, too,
Yeah.
because everyone wants to see Glenn Powell kissing somebody.
But they did shoot it. Did
did.
you ever see a version of the
Yep.
film where they kissed?
Oh, absolutely. I scored that.
You scored it.
Yeah. But I really like how they don't kiss. I think it's actually very much like Isaac style, you know, because of course we know they're going to kiss the minute they're off camera, but the fact that they're kind of interrupted by there's a storm brewing.
Yep.
And maybe it's a storm brewing for them, you know, and it's just like the metaphorical aspect of it. It's mark of Isaac's sort of elegance in his filmmaking style. But yes, that was a last minute change.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
okay.
it played in test audiences then?
I'm not entirely sure, but I do remember distinctly that in my head was the ending. And I thought, oh, they've changed it. That's cool. You know, because it was like, oh yeah, that's much better.
And instead, it's a little more of a hint and a little more for the audience to put things together and to say, hey, why didn't you give me that?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
That's
great.
I really like this ending. Yeah.
I want to pivot a little bit. This is throwing it back to last year, but The Flash, such a cool film. I was obviously losing my mind that Michael Keaton's putting the bat suit back on.
Right.
When that, first off, you and Andy Muschietti go back, so I'm sure this wasn't something that was brought to you at the last minute. But was that the plan from the very beginning? Did you know that was happening when you came on board? And when did the discussion of bringing the original theme into your score come into play?
It was day one. I was brought on before there was a script. So when Andy and I started talking about it, I really wanted to make sure I had something to, you know, useful to play him in our first meeting, because, you know, we want to just jump in with music. And so I got my hands on the Flashpoint comics on DC.com and read them cover to cover and just got a real sense of this idea, you know, Barry's, you know, it's a very tragic story in a way, you know, wanted to change the timelines to bring his mum back to life and the consequences of that, and enlisting Batman to help him. It's all there in the comics. And the first thing I wrote was this another piano piece, ironically called Run, which I had no idea would end up in the movie. It was just a kind of this idea of Barry searching. But to answer your question, the very first discussion was, we are bringing back Keaton's Batman. And I actually asked, can we use the Elfman? He said, of course, because it's just one of the greatest tunes of all time.
It is.
I remember it so well, and just that A flat minor, C minor, D major. I mean, what can you do with this chord? I mean, just, I remember when I was a kid just being obsessed with the Moonlight Sonata.
Yes.
Beethoven, because it's like, I'm going to play this here. It's in C minor. So we got, I'm not going to play it, but wrong key. And then, right?
Yeah, it's very similar.
But it's this. So you have the, you know. So I just remember going, as a kid, going, he's doing the thing, you know. And then the way it's, this keyboard is.
It's tiny.
My daughter would play this way better than me.
Yeah.
it's something so like you want to know what's next. You can go, or you can go what Elfman does, which is, right? But when you're given this playground, Andy was like, sure, we've got the rights, do what you want. So this idea was Keaton is not Batman until the very end. I think it's reel 4 or reel 5, I can't remember. Mm-hmm. It's like a 10-reel movie. But, we meet him as basically, he's retired, he's done. He's just long hair, bearded, drinking whiskey. He's cool. Like Gotham's fine. They've got a great police force, everything's good. And so we're just hinting at this tune, that like it's just, we're not even hinting at the tune, we're hinting at the harmonies and the gothic mystery.
Oh, it was messing with me though. I was like, when is it coming?
That's
Come
right.
on.
And even when we see the Batcave, right, we don't fully do the thing. We go, like,
that was almost it.
Give us the chord. And it was only when he's like we see the suits.
The full, yep.
Look one step further, but then we got to like, when it's that amazing moment with the bat wings come out and then you push into this thing, and then you realize things like you could do a little cut. Oh fuck! Sorry. I need more notes. I'll definitely write in all my scores on this Key Station 32.
You
going
can have
forward.
it. Yes,
thank you.
By the way, the piano is the beautiful Vienna Symphonic Library.
My
Steinway, but the physical M audio.
The hardware is not.
Yes.
For a child.
I used to actually, in my old studio, because it was really small, but I still loved it. It was such an amazing space to work in. I had a little toy piano as the thing. I would demo things, like have an idea. It was like with those little bells. It was always, everything was a bit spooky. But anyway, but that amazing push into Keaton, and he says, yes, I'm Batman. And the number of times we had to time that exactly. We had all these iterations of where does the chord come? And it was like I think it was like 12 frames up between yes, bah, I'm Batman, and this big horn. Big horn fanfare, big celebration. I mean, that stuff is just total kid in the candy store. Like, how often do you get to play with that stuff?
It was like the most exciting thing. and that must be so fun for you, knowing that you're messing with the audience up until the end. You're like teasing us.
It was just, it's Andy's style of filmmaking. He just wants to like make it, build tension and huge release. The funny thing is, Andy himself called this the forbidden chord. He was not a fan of it. And there's always a forbidden chord. That's why I love, we have a little tradition, Andy and I, which is like there's one chord which isn't allowed. And I just try and sneak it in there. and he still
Does he always catch it? Okay.
He's like, it's a little test because he's a total genius musician.
Keeping him sharp. Yeah.
He's musical, right? He's in the film musical. Playing guitar. Am I wrong?
Okay, so we did something a little naughty. In fact, I had all this huge intention of doing like a video about this. I might still. So there's a track on the album called Batdonian, which is like, why is it called Batdonian? And we deliberately didn't explain it. And the reason is, Andy is on that track playing Bandonian. And we actually sampled him. He came in here and we set up some microphones and we just had a blast with some tequila, and he just played a bunch of really cool stuff. And we put it into the rhythm section of that track. It's quite subtle, but maybe I can solo it for you. And yeah, Batdonian forever. That's
awesome. Yeah.
I also noticed, and we had him on the show last year, Rudy Mancuso's in the film. And I know you guys had a little connection.
Oh, he's a very good friend. Rudy's amazing. Yeah, he reached out to me on social media, God, a long time ago now, during COVID, to do like an Instagram live duet thing. He was doing that with a lot of other composers. He's an unbelievable genius artist, Rudy. Great, obviously great musician. Was a really cool composer. He's a real polymath and just a really lovely dude. And so, so that it was nice to have all the friends in the room on that movie. Yeah,
I went into it with not sure what to think because I never really followed The Flash, and I had a lot of fun watching it. And then, of course, the whole George Clooney thing and all the little Easter eggs in there. Pretty hilarious. Matt, did you want to go to the big three?
We're trying something a little bit different this season. 3 things is what we're calling it, or the big 3. We'll see what sticks with our audience. But it's just it can be quick answer, or if there's something that just reminds you of something. But it's 3 questions about 3 things, and I just wanted to ask you about if you can think of 3 things that you learned first off, working with Hans and remote control and kind of the approach that he has, that you were very hands-on in for a while, and maybe still on some projects, but what are 3 things that you think you picked up or maybe informed a little bit of your approach to your own facility, to your own team, all of that?
I was so lucky to be in Hans's orbit for a while, and he's one of the most generous people I've ever met, if not the most generous. Just in terms of the way he freely gives just the right experiences and right bits of information when you're ready to receive them, but also openly allows you to see inside what is a very, very hands-on process when it comes to the creativity of it. So I think prior to meeting Hans, this is a long time ago now, 2011, I met him for the first time. It was all about music, and I was just focusing, and it still is, of course, but that was very much like, very much in front of my eyes. And the idea of being a filmmaker, being a storyteller, how to relate to filmmakers and communicate with them, how to go through a process with them that enables a total free form, and any idea can be examined in real time at a very high level. All these things where filmmakers are used to working with film editors who you can immediately touch the film, and within a few seconds you've made the change, or actors where you can completely change the tone. I remember those years just watching Hans work with filmmakers. There's this beautiful thing he does where he creates a band situation in the room where the filmmaker is a member of the band, and Hans might be the lead singer or the main songwriter, but there's this collaboration that happens where someone can have an idea and it's immediately, okay, let's try that. And there's also this sense of, let's do something completely bold. Like, why would you think of that? And encouraging you to be quite contrarian and come up with ideas that somehow will complement the movie, but they're not doubling what's already there. Yep. And how do you make something that feels iconic, but it isn't going to kind of take over? And when it needs to, it can, but it can also exist in the seconda voce, there's under the surface. And I love the fact that over those years I was there, I didn't really know it was happening, but the amount I learned purely about filmmaking and about also how to relate to filmmakers. I mean, I think, I started working there when I was in my early 30s, and I was completely out of my depth, quite big-headed, quite arrogant, and all of that was kicked out of me. And it's very humbling, and quite right too. It's such an incredible honor to have been there and to have seen it firsthand. And I think also, there's a huge, what I was saying earlier about how he'll give you opportunities when you're ready for them. There was this moment in, I think it was 2015, 16, where he engineered a situation where I got in front of Gore Verbinski on this movie, A Cure for Wellness. Yep. And it ended up being a year-long process because Gore didn't want to use any temp. And the one condition of me coming on board was that I would be physically with him in his cutting rooms every day in a little room next door. Wow. And that situation changed my life completely, because every day I'd have to drive to Pasadena, and there was very much you clock in at 9:30 a.m. and leave at 7 p.m. And I was just sitting there making music, but every lunch, the entire post-production, every department, VFX, sound design, editorial, sound, and music, we'd all sit around the table and just talk. And I was just constantly picking up on everyone's process, and I would sometimes just go and watch but Gore himself, the room I was in there was no wall. There was a window. So and I'd be working away in there, and there was no soundproofing, and he would just every hour or so just walk by and go, or just constantly getting, and then he'd come in for maybe 2 hours and we would philosophize about story and about filmmaking, and I would just basically listen to him and to see his whole, what he would ask from me in the early days of that was to not write anything to picture. He just wanted a playlist of new suites, which he would then put on his iPod on a Saturday. We'd go on these very long walks and just listen to the music. And then on a Sunday night, I'd get all of these notes, and I just constantly fill up this Dropbox full of music. And eventually that all got distilled into temp, which then eventually got distilled into the score.
Okay,
So
yeah.
it was a very long process, but the what it meant for me is that I was amongst filmmakers for a year, and that's all I was doing. I wasn't really amongst musicians. I was just being a filmmaker that happened to be working on music. It was so exhausting. I gained about 40 pounds. I had terrible back issues. It was just so intense, but it was an amazing experience. And I remember walking out of that kind of in a daze, and I saw Hans in the parking lot of Remote Control at the end. And he was like, "God, you look terrible." What happened? And I said, "Well, I just finished A Cure for Wellness. The clue's in the name." And he said, "Oh, yes. And he looked at me and said, "I just sent you to film school." And that was actually what it was all about.
Yeah.
He was like, this kid doesn't have any idea when it comes to filmmaking. He needs to be next to someone like Gore for a year and to really learn
So it sounds like Hans knew exactly what you were getting into.
Yeah. He absolutely knew. And it was a kind of a survival, like if you can survive that. But also just so generous of Gore to just give me that access. And also, I wanted to make good on this opportunity. And it's absolutely true. Everything I learned in that year, I've applied since, just in terms of being able to confidently talk about all the technical aspects of filmmaking, but also just raw storytelling and be that much more bold and creative when it comes to choices, creative melodic choices and other things. And so that's just a great example. He saw, okay, you need some hands-on intensive training. So that's
amazing.
That's major too. I mean, we talk a lot about this with other composers, but how vital understanding story is. You're not just a musician, you're writing a character sometimes.
You got to think as if you're a filmmaker. And I remember hearing that 10 years ago and I didn't really understand. It's like, no, hang on, you're a composer.
It's very abstract without seeing how it works,
But it's that thing of like, all of this stuff is to facilitate a creative discussion. It looks cool, but what I want is for a director to be sitting here and to just say, what would happen if ... And there's some, really interesting creative thought about a character or a story. And then my brain goes to, I know just a sound or a chord progression or sit at the piano and we'll just improvise. And it's just making music completely malleable and fluid. And, if you come up with what you think is the killer idea, but then it just doesn't fly, you can just quickly pivot and jump on the Moog or on the piano, whatever, and or grab the audio and transpose it or slow it down or reverse or whatever, just so that there's nothing is precious, but you believe in every move.
Yeah.
And that's kind of watching A Cure for Wellness being edited and the bold moves that we made and all these things that, I remember seeing Gore just have an epiphany and then the whole movie would completely change in a half hour. And suddenly, you need to be able to do that as a composer as well. And that's why we're so lucky to have this technology. But actually the best technology still is an eraser or a pencil and eraser, just the speed at which you can then execute there. Sadly, we aren't allowed to do that anymore.
The second question is...
oh gosh, you got three. I completely forgot. That's such a long answer.
That's all right. No, it's good stuff.
Sorry, long
three
podcast.
big life moments that you feel shaped your musical approach. You kind of explained one of them there, and maybe working with Hans was two. But
and I think you've become a father in the last decade.
Yes.
I'm not sure how many children you have.
Just one for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you had a lot of influence from mom and dad and grandma too.
Yeah, there's a whole super interesting family history. I know we've seen a little bit of that. There's some cool stuff out there. But yeah, what when you think back, are there life moments that have shaped the way, like specific moments that have happened to you where you think, now I understand this?
Absolutely. There are several. It's quite hard to, I'm probably going to forget a few. I think almost working backwards, certainly those years working with Hans was immensely important. Personally, musically, for many reasons, and I'm very grateful for that. But there's also working with Dario Marianelli back in the day. I'm sort of going backwards now, but I met him after having completely randomly had this opportunity to write the score for Dear Wendy for Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg. And Dario heard it, and at the time he needed an orchestrator, and I didn't even know there was such a thing as orchestration in film scoring, and it turned out for me it was my first apprenticeship, and working with him, again, just being in the trenches and understanding his approach to melodic writing and how to navigate dialogue and develop character, and also just conducting his music and being he really wanted for the emotion to flow through the performance itself. So us turning off the click and just finding a way to just have that freedom of expression. All those things had a huge impact. But I mean, I think for sure my family, growing up in a household where music was, I didn't really think that this was unusual, but looking back, it clearly was. Both my parents were string players, still are. My dad is practicing the cello as much as he ever has and loving it. And just music being the kind of the culture of the family. If we weren't practicing it, we'd be talking about it. My dad was always off doing concerts and teaching. We'd have constant students coming and going.
Yeah.
There'd be chamber music being rehearsed in the living room. It was always very social. And my grandfather too was a pianist, Peter, and he had a big impact on me. It just was, you can't really discount the impact that has, having Bach being played every morning on the cello. And I think it's also just the work ethic of it. It's, the dedication you see. And again, I just didn't know any different. As a kid, I just thought that's how people do it. And I was always obsessed with film music since as long as I can remember. But it didn't really feel like that was a path for me because both of my parents and everyone in my family was very much on the classical path. So that was the one I went down to start with. But the film scoring bug never left, and it kept calling me back. And I was super grateful to have had those opportunities early on to work with orchestras in the classical world. And so there are certain teachers who had a huge impact on me. Anthony Gilbert's one of them in Manchester. When I was about 19, he sadly died about a year ago now. But I was at that time training to be a piano player. I wanted to be a concert pianist like my grandpa. And I wasn't that great. I was okay, but I hated practicing. I loved the music, but, I was much more interested in conducting. But ultimately, I'd be trying to learn a Shostakovich fugue or something and then find this amazing bit of melody or harmony, and then just the next 3 hours.
Become obsessed. Yeah.
We're examining why and how. And so my piano teacher said, I remember it was Ronan O'Hora, wonderful man. I think he still had a piano at the Guildhall School, and he just said, "Ben, what are you doing? You're a composer. Why are you here in my class? Go to Tony's class." And I did. And then Tony was just this incredible taskmaster. He very rarely smiled, and I had 2 lessons a week with him. One was 90 minutes, one was an hour, one was purely technical, and he required 10 minutes of music a week. And half of that was a technical exercise, and half of it was new original music. And it kind of got me into that rhythm of writing, just keep generating and on demand effectively. And he gave me all these amazing tools, and just was such a, he really kicked my butt. And so,
I love, as I get older, I hear these stories more and more, and I realize it myself how much of an impact a teacher can have on you.
Yeah.
And you really remember the ones that had impact on you, and then the other ones kind of just disappear in your brain. And it's like when you're in school, it feels like all teachers are the same, and it's just round and round we go. But you really realize how much an impact a certain teacher can have on their style or the way they communicate with you. And it's very clear that happened with you.
It really did, yeah. And you just almost become fixated on, like, can I get Tony to like something? Like, is he going to, and that carries through. I remember, the highest compliment you're going to get from Hans on something is, that's not too shit, yes. But that's it. It's like this idea of, like, we're dealing with music, guys. Like, remember the footsteps you're currently following. I mean, we have the greatest stuff there is, and how that sense of how dare you kind of like Blade Runner 2049, like how do you possibly follow up Vangelis? And then I was lucky enough that it was co-written with Hans, where there's enough. It's like, yes, just keep going. It's going to be fine. Like, are you sure? Yeah, just keep going. Yeah, that kind of just that encouragement and like the back and forth, and this whole incredible influence of his melodies for that score. Just it's a collaborative art form, and I think when you have a teacher who encourages you to be a maverick and bold and left field, but then film music is all about how do you relate to others, how do you elevate and enhance something that isn't music, and how do you do it in a way where you're taking other artists along for the ride with you? How do you allow directors the environment to express themselves when they don't necessarily need or want to use musical terms, but you're translating story and narrative, or same thing, but narrative and character into an emotional experience musically that doesn't sound like it's just trying to accompany, but it's inside the film coming out. And again, I try and adopt a learning mindset all the time and learn from filmmakers and try to give them something completely fresh each time. And I'm always humbled when I get to maybe follow in a traditional, like in Alien or anything like that. It's a huge honor.
Hold on really quick. You mentioned not using the click, and did I see something that when you recorded Alien, you kind of did that with, was it the choir?
Yeah, we did a lot of aleatoric stuff with the choir where we just kind of allowed.
Was that inspired by how you worked with Dario, do you think?
A little bit. It was more about composers like Penderecki and Lutosławski and Ligeti, and how they pioneered that aleatoric style where you kind of allow chaos to reign supreme, but within certain parameters. And there's a lot of stuff we recorded that didn't make it into the final, but there's kind of in the album a little bit where we were working with the choir, and I think what we did was get onto ChatGPT and come up with a chant. We just typed in, come up with a sort of pagan ritual chant that witches might chant to sort of summon the darkest entities in outer space or something, and this thing came back that was kind of terrifying. And, and we put
Did you summon something?
Well, this is what happened. We then translated it into Latin, and we said, okay, we want you guys to
no wonder this movie was so scary, Ben.
Yeah, just like chant this thing quietly and get louder and louder and start shouting and screaming this thing. And Betty and I were looking at each other like, I think we should probably stop because we might open a portal here at Abbey Road Studios. There's something going to emerge from the harp booth.
Andy pops out.
Hi. Exactly. So that is on the album, but sadly not in the movie. Yeah.
Last thing I want to ask you: three things. This can go a million directions. We chatted beforehand. This may not work, but we want to try it. 3 composers that you feel like have had an inordinate amount of impact on your musical approach, specifically on your musical sentiment, your fingerprints that you recognize maybe in some of your own work that come from someplace.
Man, it's going to be more than 3.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, at the end, we're going to get hundreds if we. Yeah.
I'll try and limit it.
What are some of the bigger ones? Maybe?
I would say, I was obsessed with Rachmaninoff when I was young. Like completely obsessed, especially with pieces like the Second Piano Concerto and Paganini Variations. And it was just that phase of life where, I mean, to this day, I'm still discovering and trying to understand it, but I'm very much about harmony and about chords and, the emotional impact of harmony. And something about how Rachmaninoff handles harmony is so magical, and it's so viscerally powerful, like it goes straight to your, solar plexus. So Rachmaninoff, I would say, is a big one, certainly from a young age. Stravinsky, just from the rhythmic aspect of his early ballets, but also just how he's just such a trailblazer. And I keep thinking, God, he wrote The Rite of Spring when he was in his early 30s. It's just, that's so humbling. I'd say Shostakovich, these are all Russian composers, weirdly. That's just
cool. Well, there's a great tradition there, yeah.
But Shostakovich, just for, again, the way there's a kind of inexorable, the way he uses melody that just, some of those adagio introductions in symphonies or string quartets, it just doesn't let you go. Ligeti for sure, Messiaen. These are all composers I was just studied like fanatically when I was in my 20s and early 20s, just to really understand or try to understand. And Messiaen in particular, he wrote this, basically a manual of how he writes music. It's called The Techniques of My Musical Language. I can't remember the French.
Oh, cool.
And there are 2 books. One is it's like you turn the page and it's technique number 32. And then the other book has all the musical examples. And he'll just simply say, okay, there's this really cool thing called, I mean, he won't say that, but in French, modes of limited transposition. So, he invented all of these scales that can only be transposed 2 or 3 times. Or what happens if you have a rhythmic pattern and you just add a dot to one note, and of course it gets offset and it gets, it becomes uneven. Or how you have a chord progression that, if if you were to repeat, the chords versus the rhythm, they don't line up, so that you're basically getting like a snapshot of eternity. And it's just these concepts which are outside
big
of music,
concepts, yeah.
And you can adapt the concepts into something new. It doesn't have to sound like Messiaen, but I remember reading those books and being like, okay, you can actually approach music in this quite philosophical, abstract way. And then that helps when you go, okay, this movie is about a tornado, or there's this idea of a DNA being shared between aliens and humans, and one is, the opposite end of the spectrum.
It's like the intellectual anchor.
Yeah, so how does that translate into music? What could we use that is under the surface, and you're not going to telegraph it, and audiences may not even notice it, except subconsciously. So, these are all classical composers. Beethoven, of course, for the same reason.
Any film composers?
I'm going to get to those.
Okay, all right.
Because that's where because yes, there's so many film composers, but Beethoven for all the obvious reasons, but mostly just because he just was another revolutionary. And I'm not even going to attempt to start talking about all this stuff, but Bernard Herrmann for sure. Not just for the scores he's most famous for, but just his harmonies and the way he would this incredible economy of execution. But towering above all of this is John Williams, obviously, and that's that. Hearing E.T., I've spoken about this a few times in these kind of interviews. It's obviously, in my opinion, the greatest film score of all time.
I agree.
To this day, and it's so. I love those anecdotes about how Spielberg turned off the projector for Adventures on Earth and just cut the movie to that, it's a standard I try and hold myself to, even if the genre is completely different. Is it at that level? And I don't think we'll ever hit that, but it's something to aspire towards. And he's in his own universe, and we're so lucky to be alive now that he's still writing, and that we get these new Williams scores every couple of years.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think he's just hit his stride even now in his 90s, and he's been hitting his stride for 50 years, but it's just this incredible. It's just off. It's not of this planet sometimes what this guy can pull off in terms of just the writing itself. And I love, again, he's still just using. We're faffing around with all electronics. It's just pencil and paper and orchestra, and it has the most impact, and it's incredibly humbling. And I've been in love with his music since I was tiny, so it's feel very lucky.
He might be the only guy who can get away with doing that nowadays, right? Because everyone wants to show me something. Don't just show me a paper. Let me hear this. And
that's fair. Filmmaking has evolved where making an edit change is instantaneous, and but I think. There's a romance to using pencil and paper. I still sketch on pencil and paper. I'll have to put it into a sequencer at some point, but there's a certain sort of immediacy to that.
Or as we were talking about right before, singing it into your iPhone messages.
Right. That's right. Of course, Hans has had a huge impact on many, many levels. Just his whole approach, his whole philosophy, and his music, of course. And I think there's countless others when it comes to. I think we're living in a really exciting time. Many of my colleagues are just trailblazing now, and we're all just a wonderful community. There's real generosity in our film scoring community, and really beautiful people. There are all these wonderful events that are held, SCL and the Academy events and BAFTA events, and just people really care. And there's a kind of exchange of ideas that unfolds. So I think there's to your earlier point about cinema and theaters, and are we living in a time of decline or whatever? Personally, I'm very optimistic that humans need group experiences when it comes to stories, and I think theaters are going to be here to stay. I really do, and I think we'll be using orchestras still for the foreseeable future. I just went through a really fun experience making a string sample library with a group with orchestral tools in Berlin, and we're still recording them. We still have them. We still go to the live orchestra, and I will always be doing that as long as I'm able to, even if it means spending all the money we have.
Right.
Because these musicians bring everything. They bring, you can have an idea, but you need to put it in front of an artist to interpret and bring it to life. And we're so lucky as composers to have that.
Well, you have a catalog big enough now to maybe do a concert of your own. Have you ever thought about doing something like that?
I have, but I really think I need to earn that right still. I still don't think, I think I need a few more years of writing before I'd attempt something like that. Like maybe 5 or 10 years. I just want to keep writing and keep building that stuff up.
All right, we'll ask you in 5 or 10 years.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
When the Hollywood Bowl show is.
It would be. I think it would be really fun to do maybe something a genre specific kind of show. Yeah. Perhaps something that examines like sci-fi and horror or something.
I mean, you kind of have a number of them that would work perfectly for that. So
yeah, I guess I'm still humbled that I got to do that. I think I still want to build up enough of a reason to justify it, but who knows? I mean, I'm not going to say no. I would, of course, love to do that. It would be the most fun thing in the world. So we'll see.
Well, dude, Ben, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you.
We're so
cool.
happy to be back doing it in person and checking out this place that, again, was an idea during a discussion 5 or 6 years ago. And it's beautiful, man.
Thank you.
And you're making magic now with Twisters and Alien. And
yeah, anything coming up that you can mention?
Yeah, there's a few things. We've got Craven the Hunter coming out later this year. And Wolfman, which just we're about to crank on with, coming out next year. And then there's Mortal Kombat for later next year.
Yeah.
And I'm about to start on a really interesting TV show, Welcome to Derry, which is the prequel series for
I've heard a lot about that. Yeah. That's going to be
amazing.
great.
The prequel to what?
To the It movies.
Oh, wow.
And Andy and Barbara are heading that up. And it's I haven't seen them yet. But
Very
I'm
cool.
Very, very excited to revisit that world. And there's a number of other things coming up too. Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly look out for those. Before we go, a reminder to our listeners, follow us on all social media and on YouTube at Score the Podcast, because we're going to start posting. We're about to do a little tour here.
If you don't mind.
Lab.
Sure.
All right.
Ben's going to show us around, so we'll post all that stuff up on our socials. And special thanks again to Vienna Symphonic Library, Synchron Stage Vienna, our friends out in Austria.
Absolutely.
Who are sponsoring this season. Ben, thank you so much for having us inside your beautiful scoring lab, and looking forward to your next project.
Thanks, guys.
For more, including bonus footage from Inside Composer Studios, follow Score, the podcast, on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and X.
Hey, wait! Before you go, this season of Score the Podcast is presented by Vienna Symphonic Library, used by many of the composers featured right here on Score the Podcast.
If you're looking for high-quality, sample-based virtual instruments that elevate your craft as a composer or musician, or just unlock the creative potential of your music, Vienna Symphonic Library has the tools that you need all in one place with the Synchron Series.
Recorded on Stage A of the Vienna Synchron Stage, the Synchron Series features every orchestral instrument, pianos, choir, everything you need, while innovating to create an intuitive, fully customizable software suite that puts you in control of everything you create.
These are real instruments recorded and engineered by the same people recording scores of your favorite films and TV shows. Netflix's The Crown, Disney and Marvel shows, Amazon Prime's Rings of Power, and HBO's Dune Prophecy, among many more. And the strings are something really impressive. Synchron Duality Strings is a package where you get both the large ensemble on Stage A and the small ensemble in a smaller, drier Stage B, performing simultaneously, so you can blend to create your own unique sound. Our listeners are using it, our guests on the show are using it, and for a limited time, get 20% off Synchron Duality Strings with promo code SCORE-VIENNA. That will expire, so check it out. The best of Vienna, the city of music at your fingertips.
The city of music.
The city of music.
We need to get out there. Listen after this message for a demo. We're going to play a mocked-up version of James Newton Howard's theme to Fantastic Beasts using VSL's sample libraries. It's amazing.
Or you can check them out yourself at vsl.co.at. Check out their sample player, free libraries, and demos that you can play around with right now.
And from all of us, thank you to the awesome team at Vienna Symphonic Library for supporting this season of Score the Podcast.